So we're back to the land of Down Under, where I have the grueling task of waking up at 4 in the morning just to watch Daniel Ricciardo eliminated in Q1. Damn, I wrote this on Friday, not knowing just how true that would end up being. Hey there guys, I'm Will, welcome to FP1 and the comedy review. And now we've got the traditional early start moan out of the way, let's talk about another fantastic weekend of off-track action in 2024. You're probably in the middle of writing your comment outlining just how lucky I am as a European watching this sport, or telling me I'm a f***ing who should die in a f***ing hole. Either way, once you posted that, you're welcome to like and subscribe. Now let's get into the comedy review. It's the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. Kicking things off as we usually do with the news and the latest updates on Horny Horner, the female employee at the centre of the allegations, has reportedly filed an official appeal with the FIA. Oh wait, no one cares anymore. Maybe that's because the FIA were busy dealing with their own drama over the last couple of weeks, eventually declaring that they'd looked into President Mohammed bin Sulayem's actions over the past year and conveniently deciding he'd done nothing wrong whatsoever. The best quote has to go to Lewis Hamilton on this one. He was asked if he still had any trust in Big Ben, the 7-time champion, responding, "He never has." You know what, #bless would be a great replacement for me on the comedy review. With it being the Australian Grand Prix, you can bet there was a lot of focus on the two Australian drivers in the field going into this one. And by two Australian drivers, I of course mean Oscar Piastri and Valtteri Bottas. The stake driver stole the limelight whilst taking part in this advert for Uber car share, which honestly left me rather lost for words. Finally in the news, the true GOAT himself, Nikita Mazepin, has at last had his EU restrictions lifted, meaning the Russian driver can now rejoin the Formula 1 grid. Anyway, let's get on to FP1. The high-speed nature of the Albert Park circuit was quick to catch out some of the more experienced drivers in the field. Fernando Alonso, one of the first to take a journey into the gravel, which as it turned out was just him practicing for Saturday qualifying. Bottas, meanwhile, after showing his arse to the world on Australian TV, did so again to the spectators at turn 10.
Check this out.
Piastri would have a wobble at the same corner, though that was nothing compared to the snap which saw George Russell spray diarrhea all over the corner exit later on. The Red Bulls once again seemed to struggle to find the correct balance early on into the weekend, which allowed McLaren and Lando Norris to end the hour on top of the timesheets. All eyes would be on them as they attempted to build on a strong performance at Jeddah last time out, and the same could be said of Alex Albon, who said this ahead of the weekend.
Obviously we didn't fully execute last year very well. I went off a little bit, but we had a quick car, and hopefully we can have that again this year.
Oh look, he's in the wall. Albon's accident saw the tyre driver sit out of FP2, having to watch from the sidelines whilst the team saw the other car of Logan Sargeant almost do the exact same thing in the final sector. At the other end of the timing screens, it was Charles Leclerc and Ferrari topping the busy session, despite both cars having to navigate the two mobile Aston Martin branded chicanes at points over the hour. Alonso nearly found a way to glitch over the barriers at what I'm now calling Albon Corner, and Lance Stroll made a new enemy in Petr after targeting a bird out of the final turn. Elsewhere, cars were busy spraying more diarrhea at turn 10, Pierre Gasly considered ending it all at turn 5, and Logan Sargeant tried emulating Lewis Hamilton's lines from FP1. That was clearly too much for James Vowles' blood pressure, and all throughout Friday afternoon, rumours were swirling that the Williams outfit could withdraw the American and place Albon in his car if the tyre's chassis was deemed irreparable after the shunt in the morning. Williams were adamant that no decision had yet been made, despite footage in the garage clearly showing the team interchanging parts already. Sure enough, the team would reveal that Logan had gracefully given up his ride for the good of the team, if you trust their statement anyway. On the bright side, this was probably the first bit of sympathy Logan's received since he became a Formula 1 driver at the start of 2023. On the less bright side, when your team are putting more faith in the guy who ripped his f***ing car in half, maybe it's time to start drafting a new CV. The funniest thing now would of course be for Alex to do it all again, though that wouldn't happen in FP3. The tyre driver ending the session 13th, a full second clear of Leclerc, who once again finished practice in P1. Verstappen was in hot pursuit, despite still not looking totally comfortable with his RB20, and it was actually quite nice to see no one getting excited unnecessarily about anyone else taking pole later that day in qualifying. We haven't spoken much about him yet, but Carlos Sainz was doing pretty well, despite still being in recovery following his removed appendix in Saudi. The Spaniard admitting that he was still in a little discomfort, though at least he wasn't walking around like someone who'd shat themselves like he was in Jeddah. With very little left to talk about, and me being on what feels like negative hours sleep, let's just jump to qualifying. The big shock of Q1 would be Esteban Ocon, who defied reality and got an Alpine out of the drop zone for the first time all year. Gasly and Slow were stuck in the bottom 4 by this point, and it looked as if the two Haas cars might just join them. That was until Kevin Magnussen was saved by Daniel Ricciardo, the Aussie putting in what he described as his best lap of 2024, which may have had something to do with him cheating on the exit of turn 4. At least my last video will get some extra views now. The top 15 cars would progress into Q2, with Alex Albon setting a bloody good lap to put himself P11 after the initial runs. That was a bit much for what we must remember is still Logan Sargent's machine, and they decided it might be too dangerous to push it any higher up the order, so called it a day early. Yuki Tsunoda meanwhile would rub salt in Ricciardo's wounds by putting his RB into the top 10. That meant one of the top 5 teams would see a car fail to make it through. Lance Stroll, oh hang on, no it's not him for once. No, instead it was Lewis Hamilton. The Briton showed Ferrari just what they'd paid so much money for in 2025 as he ended Q2 outside of the top 10. This tweet from Sky Sports really hasn't aged well now, has it? That takes us on to Q3, where Verstappen would take pole position, and there's literally no point talking about the specifics here, are there? His teammate Sergio Perez had one of his better quali performances, though still hasn't started on the front row since Miami of last year. He'd still find a way to self-sabotage his P3, getting a grid drop for impeding Hülkenberg back in Q1. Would that really have mattered in Hulk's final finishing position? Probably not, but it's nice to see the FIA implementing the rules for a Red Bull driver for once. Right, that'll help the engagement statistics. Now let's get on to Sunday's Grand Prix. Sunday would kick off with more complaining. Lewis Hamilton unhappy with his starting tyre compound. Problem was, he chose to voice these complaints as the cars started on the formation lap, so I don't really know what he expected the team to do. Anyway, the lights would go out and we got a fairly even start between Verstappen and Sainz. Sergio Perez would lose a spot to Russell, which just about shows you how interesting the first lap was. As Verstappen shot up the road, it looked as if it was about time to get out the alternative FOM graphics that removed the Dutchman from the proceedings. But hang on just a minute, because Carlos Sainz, with his latest weight reduction upgrades following his removed appendix, was able to swoop around the outside into turn 9. That's okay, I thought, I'll just wait a lap and see Max streaming by once again. But that didn't happen. Instead, we spotted an odd plume of smoke appearing from the rear brake duct of the Dutchman's RB20, and our hopes and dreams were finally about to be realised. We've seen the Verstappens on fire before. This time, however, Max was taking his father's approach, as Red Bull revealed their new brake duct sponsor in the form of the Taliban. Anyway, whilst Helmut Marko went to see if Logan Sargent had another spare chassis to give away, I, despite waking up at 4 in the morning, was suddenly awake. Let's bring myself back down to earth then with an update on Daniel Ricciardo. The Aussie had made up 2 spots so far, which sounds okay until you remember that those 2 spots were in fact gifted from waiting for the Saubers to wheel out their monkey pit crew again. Meanwhile, Gasly and Hülkenberg were somehow in the points at this stage, making me worry Verstappen's retirement was just a cruel dream. The remaining Red Bull of Perez would box on lap 15, narrowly edging out Hamilton, who got reminded in his own words of what a fast car looked like. As he started #blessing the radio with his complaints, Toto Wolff had seen enough and chose just to turn his engine off. Hey, at least he still beat Verstappen, that'll make Team LH happy. The Brit's retirement brought out the virtual safety car just after Carlos Sainz had come into the pits from the lead. The big benefactor then was Fernando Alonso, who pitted under the VSC to emerge in 5th on the faster medium tyre compound. Just up the road, the pair of Ferraris were now together, the team making a rather strange call, and by strange call I mean one that I actually agreed with, ordering both cars to hold position in case Charles Leclerc momentarily lost control of his singular brain cell. Now you guys complain that I should focus on the whole field a bit more in these videos and not just on the front runners, so here's Esteban Ocon. The Frenchman saw what happened to Verstappen, giving him a fantastic idea. He thus spent the entire race playing a game of catch the tear off with his own rear brake ducts, the winning prize being the opportunity to get out of that box of an Alpine a little bit early when said brake ducts pulled a Grosjean. Unfortunately, the team caught wind of this and told him to stop. Back at the front, Sergio Perez was making his way past Alonso for P5. He was still almost a pit stop behind the leading Ferraris though. How he'd managed that in a Red Bull, I'm just going to put down to Perez reasons. But we still have half the race to go, so maybe the Mexican could bring the fight to the McLarens and Ferraris in front. Or maybe Perez's reasons would strike again. Sauber, meanwhile, were breaking their own records, just not the ones they necessarily wanted. Slow was now in the pits for so long that Daniel Ricciardo was a whole pit stop ahead of him. They then pit Bottas again, so the Chinese driver would have someone to talk to for their final third of the Grand Prix. Speaking of Ricciardo, the Honey Badger had made an overtake. Granted, it was on an Alpine and not relevant enough to even be shown on the main feed, but I'm taking these wins when I can these days. The final laps of the race were all about George Russell tracking down Fernando Alonso in 6th. George was on the prowl in the closing stages, which means one thing and one thing only. We just have to wait, and soon enough we'll have an almighty yep, there it is. George and Mercedes would rush to the stewards, claiming Fernando got on the brakes, which tends to happen when you approach a corner. Up at the front though, after another dominant performance, it'd be Max Verstappen taking yet another win for... No, hang on, sorry, no, I wrote that bit on Friday as well. Carlos Sainz, you know what, take a bow. The Spaniard managed this one perfectly, giving Ferrari their first win of the season. And while his appendix may be sat on the sidelines, the Spaniard has firmly put himself on the map in the driver market for 2025. Leclerc and Norris would round out the podium, whilst Perez's reasons would in fact leave the Mexican in 5th place, so get those mid-season swap rumours going again. In all seriousness, I've got to admit, if you interchange Sainz's name for Verstappen, then this wasn't the most enthralling race in the world. But just the idea of someone else winning a Grand Prix moves this one up the rankings for me, especially given Max will probably win the remaining 21 races in 2024. Hats off to Tsunoda, Hulkenberg and K-Mag for grabbing points on the fringes of the top 10. It's nice to see the Haas able to actually race at the end of a Grand Prix, rather than cruise to the end on tyres which look like Cardi B if you left her in the sun for too long. What did you think of this one though? Let me know down in the comments and vote in the poll over on my community page. While you're at it, if you enjoyed the vid, drop it a like and get subscribed for more comedy reviews all throughout the 2024 season. A huge thank you to all my patrons and channel members for their support. They got a preview of this video early, so if that sort of thing interests you or you just want to support me and the channel, then you can head over to the links down in the description below. If you want to hear even more from me, for whatever reason, you can check out me on all my other socials here, and join our Discord if that still exists. I still need to check. I'll be back very soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.